Hey there, geeks and geekettes. This is my review of DCU's Swamp Thing. Stay tuned. Okay, so before I get to the review of the actual TV show, this is my second time recording it because the first one I forgot to leave my phone on airplane mode and there was constant interference, my phone trying to connect, etc. Then I tried recording it again not so long ago, got about 5 minutes into it, and then realised I forgot to plug in my microphone. So this is technically my third go. Sometimes this isn't easy. So, on with Swamp Thing. A bit of context for you, and I'm not sure if anyone else has noticed this, but the DC Extended Universe, they're kind of secretly making the coolest shows on streaming TV. Now, obviously, Netflix Marvel deal has fallen through, and until these characters resurface or don't resurface and something else happens, we don't know how the Marvel TV stuff is going to do. But DC are nailing it. Titans was really good. I really enjoyed Titans. I liked that they took it that much darker, made it that more violent and brutal. So, yeah. And Swamp Thing, to me, it was there. It really was. Tragically, somehow DC killed the monster of Swamp Thing, and the monster this time being the studio, not the actual Swamp Thing. James Wan probably had a harder time directing the monster of the studio than actual Swamp Thing. There were rumours of North Carolina didn't pay what they promised to pay in the first place, and that's since come out to be completely false. So obviously this has been bogged down and what have you, and the show has suffered for it, I think, personally. We'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, apparently the executives have killed it. So I watched this pilot, and I've got to say I was hooked. It didn't look like anything else in Superheroville, and this wasn't a superhero show, or it wasn't filmed or shot as a superhero show. This was produced, shot and filmed by James Wan. It was a James Wan TV show, and it was a horror show with superhero elements to it, in my opinion. I got hooked to it. The horror elements were actually genuinely scary. The first scene I can think of, it was in the pilot show, and it was a plant-human hybrid in a morgue coming to life, and it was true horror, and it was awesome for it. Really, really cool. The effects were brilliant. The acting was brilliant. It sort of harked back to The Thing, that sort of scene with the spider head. It was very reminiscent of that, which is one of my favourite scenes in a movie. So this thing was off to a flying start for me. I am a Swamp Thing fan, and I had low expectations because I didn't think it would transfer well into a TV series. So if we put the horror to one side, we've got Alec Holland, who's originally our protagonist. Then he's got a tragic and strange story, and his villains, or the villains he faces as himself or later on Swamp Thing, they make for compelling viewing. They really do. But unfortunately, with only one season, Andy Bean can't give us more, or what I think he could have given us as Alec. Derek Mees as the titular hero showed to me how good an actor he is by portraying such strong emotion through a rubber suit. I mean, the guy's got this much and this much of his face. He's a little bit less than Batman. He is covered in latex and rubber and whatever else. And for him to portray the character the way he did and the emotion the way he did, I mean, hats off to that guy. Really good. The villains were good. There's two villains in Swamp Thing. They are Avery Sunderland and Jason Woodrue. And they were fleshed out enough to be human beings, not just a comic book villain or your typical comic book villains. And I'll get your typical villain when I get to Jason Woodrue. They weren't just built as fodder for the Swamp Thing. Sunderland, he has no idea he's a bad guy. He genuinely thinks and believes that he is helping the town, and the way the town holds him in high esteem makes him almost untouchable. But that's not the way he views himself. He views himself as the saviour of this town that's built on this swamp. And it's really cool. And his backstory with his daughter and his wife, that it's all really well written, really well acted. And yeah, it works. But then you put the secondary villain in. Jason Woodrue is the character's name. He's a different villain. He's a scientist that is your typical obsessed scientist, but in this show, he's not your typical obsessed scientist. He doesn't hit sort of those cliches across the board. His obsession is born of something pure, hope that what he's doing will save his wife from her quick advance in Alzheimer's. And the swamp comes into play there because the swamp has healing properties that he is trying to use for his wife. So he's not a bad guy per se, but his obsessions, they do push him too far, and he becomes a villain through them. But he's a well-intentioned villain. And these are guys we can see their point of view almost. I mean, Avery Sunderland, he turns into a bit of a wrong one, we'll see. But genuinely, this is well written. So now, despite this program being called Swamp Thing, Crystal Reed plays Abby Arcane, and she is the lead. And she's a brilliant lead. She's a good actress. She conveys emotion really well. Despite her being very, very young, or looking very, very young, she is believable as this scientist and the head of her field. And when I saw posters, I was like, is she too young to convey a scientist? I saw her in Gotham, and she was alright in that. And I didn't know if she would be good enough for this role, but she nails it. She seems to genuinely care about Alec and then Swamp Thing. She definitely cares about the town. She's definitely racked with guilt, and she definitely cares about the residents. There's another arc with her and a young girl that she's trying to save, and yeah, she genuinely seems to care, and that's all cool. So I'm gonna have to get into the negatives here, because this series suffered because of the ending, and it is such a shame. Really, what did they do? Right, so the major down for this series is the rushed ending. They sort of crammed in the Abby and the Swamp Thing romance. It was a slow burn, and then suddenly, yay, she loves him, and it didn't work. The connection between Alec and Abby in the beginning for me was fleshed out, and the ending, unfortunately, it undid that for me. Now, as I said in the beginning, executives apparently got in and cut this thing by 3 episodes. Another 3 hours of runtime could really have fleshed out the Abby and Swamp Thing story and given us a better more progressive, fluid sort of forward motion for it instead of cramming it in. The other thing, the additional 3 hours to me would have given us better endings for the villains. But instead what we got was Woodrue, who was a great character, just given an after credits sequence or post credits sequence where he's suddenly a version of a Swamp Thing. There was no transformation or nothing. It was just, here's the end of the show. Oh, by the way, here's your next villain, but we're not making series 2. And it was completely wasted. If they had left this guy just go off into the sunset, it would have been a little bit better than shoehorning in him turning into a supervillain that we'll never ever see. I guess they paid for the supervillain effects and supervillain costume and the rubber suit. I'm guessing they're not cheap, so they may as well use it, but it was completely wasted. Speaking of wasted, Avery's character is now wasted because we see him cough up some plant matter at the end, but we don't get no closure. We don't know if he dies, if he lives, if he becomes another Swamp Thing. It just... And I sound like I'm coming down really hard on this show, and I don't mean to, because I really, really enjoyed it until the last 2 episodes. This thing was phenomenal. It looked beautiful. The acting was out of this world. It was a horror superhero mashup, and it was really good for it. And the ending ruined it. There were other things. I mean, there were plenty of side characters. We meet most of the sort of the town. But we were left to guess. There was a guy in there granting wishes that I guess was the devil. But we don't know. Harlan, a character, was hauled off in a truck. For no apparent reason, it would seem. Did he live? Did he die? Did he come back? And then there was Ian Ziering, or Ziering's Blue Devil. Now, the last time I saw Ian Ziering in anything was Beverly Hills 90210 when I was a kid and my mum forced me to watch it. And he plays the Blue Devil in this, and he's brilliant. He is really good at what he does. And we hardly ever get to see any of it. They build it up, and had a season 2 come on, there would have been the introduction of the full-fledged Blue Devil. We didn't get to see it. It was a waste of a character arc, and we barely got to see the Blue Devil, which is a shame. The Cable family, the mother and son police officers, even if season 2 had gone ahead, they could have cut them out completely. Bar them being involved in the shooting of Alec that becomes Swamp Thing. They were pointless characters, and I don't see the need for them. There was too much time wasted on them that could have been spent on Avery, on Alec, on Abby, or Dr. Woodrue, what have you. And it's such a shame, because if this series ended the way it did and I knew season 2 was coming, I would be really excited, because we'd get to see the Blue Devil and Swamp Thing's growing supernatural world. We'd get to see Maria Sunderland and her supernatural ties growing. Abby and Alec's relationship and where that goes. And we won't get to see any of it. It just sort of shuddered to a stop. It's bad. Just a shame, because the rest was so good. The show could have gotten a lot weirder, and it could have got better for it. It could have gone on the Umbrella Academy levels of weirdness, or the Boys level of violentness, and worked better for it. DC have really dropped the ball on this, because I absolutely loved this show until the last 2 episodes. This could have been the start of something massive. This thing could have sprawled like an epic sprawling story, and they ruined it. If season 2 had been coming, this show would have gotten an 8 out of 10 from me, because I know there is no season 2 coming. This show gets a 4 out of 10. That's harsh, but the end was rushed. Nothing went anywhere. None of the stories were capped. Nothing felt finished. If this had been a one self-contained story, it would have been awful. For something that was going to go on and spawn a series, this was brilliant. And they've ended it with one season, and I'm genuinely saddened by it. Originally, I've got my notes there, that's why my eyes keep moving, because I'm reading notes. And initially, I gave this a 6 out of... I gave this an 8 out of 10, apart from the ending. But the more I've thought about it, we're down to a 4, or a 4. Yeah, a 4. Because there was no endings for the characters. Now, the special effects are brilliant. The initial story is brilliant. The acting is great. The setting, the mood, everything is exactly what I wanted in a Swamp Thing show. And then the last 2 episodes completely ruined it. It undid everything I loved about the show. And it undid... Well, yeah, it undid everything. I wanted to watch another season of this show. Had this continued, this would have been an 8 out of 10. I would have been hooked for the next one. So there's my views, 4 out of 10. And sadly, 4 out of 10, because this show had so much promise. I really enjoyed it. The effects, the horror elements. James Wan did an incredible job producing. The cast did great. The effects were great. It's just such a shame that somebody somewhere got involved and cut this thing down by 3 episodes, didn't allow this show to be a self-contained one singular season, and just released a half-assed job in the end. And it's bad. Sad. I hope somebody picks this up. I hope Netflix or somebody out there, I hope there's a fan outcry, and this fan outcry leads to a season 2 being made, because it needs to be made. And then this thing that I've just reviewed goes straight back up to an 8. Anyway, I've waffled on enough. I'm off to finish my beer. So guys, like, subscribe, share, do all that YouTube stuff that I keep asking people to do. Thanks for the support, because my channel is growing slowly. And if you were unfortunate enough to watch the last video and hear all the squeaking, buzzing and vibrating, I'm really sorry. I forgot to put my phone in airplane mode, and I've got a microphone attached. But cheers guys, I'll see you soon. Bye.